Ahla wa sahlan to the first collaboration between the Arabian Society and the Ahmadiyya Muslim Student Association. It brings me a great deal of pleasure to collaborate and to have had the opportunity to collaborate with the Student Association because we, as a secular society, have tried to encourage the diversity of our membership as well as the education of all issues which relate to the Arabic culture. I'd like to thank all of you who have supported us this year because we have had the honor of being shortlisted of over 180 student societies as the most developed student society here at UCL.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings of God be upon you all. So I have to say at the very onset that you don't have an expert in the field of linguistics before you today, but a layman really, an ordinary human being who has come to speak about the common heritage of mankind. Human beings have long wondered whether all nations and races have a common origin. And happily, the science of genetics has now proven this intuition to be correct. Similarly, people have been noticing similarities between languages since the beginning of human civilization. This has begged the question, do languages also have a common origin? This question has been thoroughly studied, in particular in recent times, and several theories have been put forward, but no single extant language has yet been unanimously identified as the source of all languages. Some favor one language to be the original tongue, while others fancy another language. Many believe the original language disappeared long ago and no longer exists today. This evening, I will provide evidence from the Islamic perspective that Arabic is the original language of mankind. Now, this exercise may appear to be a bit subjective, of course, because Arabic is, after all, the prime vector of the Islamic message. However, we will observe that this presentation is much more than a mere emotional exaltation of the Arabic language. It's based on facts. That today Islam is attached to Arabic will in no way change the fact that the language which appeared tens of thousands of years ago on the Arabian Peninsula is indeed the source from which all languages sprang forth. So why do I say that today I will be presenting the Islamic perspective on this question? It is because the scripture of Islam, the Holy Quran, speaks on this question and gives interesting pointers and clues as to the path we should follow to get to the truth about our common origins, both genetic and linguistic. I propose to read out a few of the thought-provoking verses of the Quran that speak on this question. Please note that the verse references I'm presenting here will be according to the numbering system where the Basmala or Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is counted as number 1, verse number 1. And so you have to remember that because some translations have not got the same numbering. There'll be a difference of one number between the two. Now coming to the early origins of man. At the beginning of verse 214 of its second chapter, the Surah Al-Baqarah, the Holy Quran states, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, كان الناس أمة واحدة, which means mankind used to be one single community. That's what the Quran is stating here, that all mankind at one point in time used to be one single community. Now what happened to this one single community? In verse 21 of chapter 30, the Quran declares, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَكُم مِّن تُرَابٍ ثُمَّ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ تَنْتَشِرُونَ. And of the signs of God is that He created you from dust. Then behold, you are human beings spreading out. Now here we see that the fact that we and all life forms have been created from the dust emitted from stars, and that the human race has continuously spread to all parts of the world, is presented as a great sign for those who ponder and reflect. Now coming back to the question of the common origin of all languages on earth, the Quran gives a very important pointer indeed, in order to help mankind retrace their steps back to the first language. In verse 23 of chapter 30, the Quran states, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ. And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your tongues and colours. In that surely are signs for those who possess knowledge. Here, the diversity of language is linked to the diversity observed in colour and race. This verse provides interesting insight into the following question. Can the genetic study of the origins of man lead to the original language of humankind? Now, recent studies have provided sound evidence that all races on Earth emerged from Africa. That's pretty much well known. Volumes have been written on this topic, but I would particularly like to mention a very interesting book entitled The Journey of Man, A Genetic Odyssey, which was written by Spencer Wells, who's an American geneticist and anthropologist, in which techniques and theories of the science of genetics as well as evolutionary biology were used to retrace early migrations of human beings out of Africa and their subsequent dispersal all over the world. In 2003, the book was made into a television documentary which can be watched on the internet. We will return to the subject of the human migration out of Africa, for this is intimately linked with the topic being explored from this evening. I shouldn't have pressed that yet. There you go. So, where did the first language come from? There's a great conundrum which has yet to be solved by experts in linguistics, and it is, where did the first language come from? And now we can go there. So here we have Akbar, the Mughal emperor of India. He demonstrated by isolating a group of newborn babies who were then raised by mute wet nurses, that they could not, even by their 4th year, utter a single intelligible sound. And with respect to this experiment, David Crystal, in the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Language, calls Akbar remarkably modern in his views. Indeed, it has been established that children who are not exposed to language since their conception do not and cannot generate a complete language of their own. Children must learn their language from their mothers and elders. So how did the first language appear? Many linguists today believe that language started from, like grunts and simple sounds and developed until it became a complex medium for the expression of the most exquisite of abstract ideas and emotions. This is, of course, a highly romanticized view and is not based on any hard evidence, because nobody can actually go back in time to actually see that occurring. So it's just guesswork at best. So the question is, do we find support for the theory of natural evolution in language? No. In fact, quite the contrary is observed. Indeed, in The Unfolding of Language, Guy Deutscher writes, small tribes of Stone Age technology speak languages with structures that sometimes make Latin and Greek seem like child's play. End of quotation. While old languages in isolation tend to retain their complexity, others tend to get simplified in their structure over time, all the while seeing a gradual increase in vocabulary either by borrowings from other languages or by the construction of new words from existing lexemes. Complex plurals are dropped, case endings and gender are often done away with, verbs and syntax are simplified over time. This process is greatly accelerated when a language comes into close contact with another language. And a highly interesting example, of course, is to be found in the development of the English language, from Old English through Middle English to Modern English. Today, it can be said that English is getting increasingly simplified at a rate that is found alarming by authoritarian prescriptivists and sticklers who are fighting a losing battle, may I add, to preserve what they consider to be the correct language, whatever that is. Nowhere does one find the contrary to be true. No language having relatively simple rules governing the formation of its plurals, case endings, etc., will ever start to naturally progress on to more complexity in these areas. It just does not occur. It therefore stands to reason that the oldest language must have been a very complex one indeed. And coupled with the fact that humans do not invent language, they must learn it from someone else. The puzzle of where this complex language originally comes from remains unresolved by science. The Holy Quran, on the other hand, does offer an answer. In verses 2 to 5 in chapter 55, which is Surah Ar-Rahman, it declares, Ar-Rahman, allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan, allamahu al-bayan. The gracious God taught the Quran, He created man, and He taught him clear speech. Now, in Arabic, al-bayan, or clear speech, means speech by which man can express his ideas and emotions in a way that can be fully understood by others. So here we have it. After having told us that mankind was initially one single community, and that the diversity of human tongues is linked to the diversity of color and race, the Quran tells us that the first language was revealed by God to man. In order to learn a language, a human being needs a teacher. And when no one was available as a teacher, God Himself became that first teacher. The process by which language is revealed by God to mankind can be understood from a recent phenomenon, a fairly recent phenomenon, which occurred in the case of Hadrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. May peace be upon him and may God reward him for his services to the Arabic language. He was an Indian Muslim whose mother tongue was Punjabi. And having received but a very rudimentary teaching of Arabic as a child, he could neither write nor speak Arabic, a language which is not spoken in the north of India. However, God revealed to him in one single night 40,000 root words of Arabic along with the necessary knowledge in grammar in order to use them. And thereafter, immediately after that, he began to write books in such exquisite Arabic that he was accused of hiring experts in Arabic to help him compose them. In response, he openly challenged his detractors to call to their aid the learned men of Arabia, Egypt, and Syria, whose mother tongue was, of course, Arabic, and to compose a book that could match his. No one took up his challenge, and at best, some individuals wrote articles to find fault with his Arabic works, and they utterly failed to produce a single book in response to them. In a short while, you will be treated to a reading of a portion of his writings by my distinguished colleague, Mr. Hani Taher, sitting here today. Hadrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad also declared Arabic to be Ummul al-Sina, which means the mother of all languages, and not only that, but the original tongue of mankind. To present this important verity, he wrote a book entitled Minan ur-Rahman, which means favors of the gracious God. Now, first of all, is there any historical basis for this theory? Now, before we explore the theme of Arabic being the original language of mankind, we need to see whether it has any plausibility with regard to the history of man, or if it is just a fanciful idea. If, for instance, someone declares that Korean is the mother of all languages, it's the first language of mankind, then we would have to confirm that the original group of humans from which we all descend did indeed live in Korea, and that through genetic studies we can establish that there were early human migrations from Korea towards the rest of the world. Then they'd carry their language with them, and that would make sense. If this is proven to be the case, then Korean would certainly have a strong case in that claim, of course, of being the original tongue. And the same would be true of any language, in fact. But what we find is that humans migrated out of Northeast Africa and spread into Central, Western, and Southern Africa and into the Levant. The earliest route that those early humans took out of Africa around 125,000 years ago has recently been genetically retraced as having gone through the land bridge between Eurasia and Africa, which is the Sinai Peninsula. And that was at a time when the Sahara was green. However, the branch that reached the Middle East died out around 90,000 years ago due to a global freeze-up, so they hardly went any further than that. More recent research has thrown up evidence that there was another migration by a single group of humans around 85,000 years ago this time. And on this occasion, it happened via the route into the Arabian Peninsula at what is called the Gates of Grief. And you can see just a very sketchy map to show how that happened. It was from Northeast Africa into the Arabian Peninsula. Now, all non-African people are descended from this single group of human beings. An interesting interactive map showing the timeline of the routes taken by these migrations has been made available on the internet by the Bradshaw Foundation. It's free, so anyone can check it there. Furthermore, research is now showing that there were several back migrations into the African continent from Arabia. Indeed, results from genetic testing carried out all over Africa are suggestive of multiple layers of placements. And the notion of certain human mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, some researchers mention haplogroup L3 in particular, going from East Africa to Arabia and then returning back into Africa and spreading out into North, South, and West Africa, is increasingly appearing to be plausible. All these African Middle Eastern layers show up time and time again. Anyway, those who enjoy such studies will find, I'm sure, The Incredible Human Journey, the 2009 documentary made by Dr. Alice Roberts of her genetic research retracing the origins of all human populations on Earth, to be of particular interest. As we have proposed, Arabia is that area of the world to which all non-African populations can retrace their genetic history. It is also the area from which back migrations took place towards the whole of Africa. It is therefore not at all implausible that the language which was born in the Arabian Peninsula was also carried by these early humans along their migrations. Thus, the Holy Quran has provided valuable insight for those who reflect by linking the development of human races and ethnicities around the world to the gradual development of different languages. It has also been proven right when it speaks of the whole mankind having been one single community at one point, and having thereafter spread out, as opposed to the theory of polygyny or multiple genesis, where modern human beings were thought, erroneously as we now know, to have appeared independently in different parts of the world. The Quran, in effect, gives support to the now established theory of monogeny or monogenesis. All this information came from an unlettered Arab prophet, the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, 1,400 years ago, in that very desert of Arabia where the migrations had begun. I leave it to the intelligent and wise ones to reflect upon the philosophical implications of the unanticipated correctness of this information contained in the Quran, a book which is now 1,400 years old. When the Quran is right about monogenesis, and when it is right about all men spreading out from a single group of humans, it surely deserves our attention when it speaks of that first language being revealed by God at a time when there was no one on earth to teach language to human beings. As we have demonstrated, or tried to at least, complex languages are not created, they are learnt. So someone had to have taught the first one in the first place. Now, returning to the book written by Hadrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community to which I belong, he wrote in that book that Arabic is the language revealed by God to mankind and was not invented by human beings. Secondly, that Arabic is the mother of all languages and as such possesses a natural affinity with every language on earth, and that it bears a closer affinity with some languages than with others. Also, that all languages can be traced back to Arabic. Now, first of all, Hadrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad demonstrated that Arabic possessed 5 interesting features which are either not shared or shared to a much lesser degree by other languages. Number 1, Arabic possesses tens of thousands of root words which all fully meet the needs of human expression, without the need of borrowing from other languages. For example, in Arabic, there are separate words to describe every stage of human development, from the time of conception, for the different stages of the development of the embryo and then the fetus, the different phases of the development of the baby into the child, for the stages of development of the child into the adolescent, for the stages of adulthood, and for different stages of old age right up to death. This feature is not shared to the same degree by the original lexemes of other languages. And this is just one example out of so many. And this is since the beginning. It's always been like this. It's not like a recent development. Number 2, in Arabic, every common noun is based on deep philosophical reasoning. In other words, in Arabic, it is known why something is called what it is. there is always a logical reason for calling it whatever it's called. By contrast, in other languages, the reason behind the name of any given object is very often a mystery. For example, why do we call a tree a tree? Why don't we call it a stone? Why do we call a dog and not a cat? Because there is no real philosophical reasoning behind many of the words in different languages, but in Arabic, for every single word, there is a philosophical basis. It makes sense, in other words. Number 3, in Arabic, all the thousands of root words and their derivatives are mathematically organized, as anyone who studied Arabic will know. This feature is not found to this degree of excellence in other languages. Number 4, in Arabic speech, a small number of words can be heavy with meaning. The founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community gives a few examples, and I just took them out of his book. They're just a few that he gave others. For example, we have the verb, a single verb, aradtu, which means, among other things, I roamed about Mecca and Medina and all the habitations between them. That's just aradtu. And then we have, for example, tahfala, which is a single verb again. It means he eats and has determined always to eat millet bread. And that's a verb in itself. Then we have jathama, which means one verb again, half the night has passed. Then he also gives examples of single syllables that have meaning in Arabic. For example, fi. Fi is one letter with a vowel, and it means be faithful. Qi, and that's also in the Quran. It means keep an eye on, look after, watch over. Just one letter. Now, most often we'll find in other languages whole sentences must be resorted to in order to convey the same meaning, and I've just done that now in English. 5, the roots and expressions of Arabic are perfectly able to convey the most subtle feelings, thoughts, and abstract ideas of the human mind. Now, these 5 qualities of Arabic, when taken together, show that ancient, crude, and uncivilized human beings could not have invented such a language. So why did different languages even appear? There are several reasons why different languages appeared. One of the major reasons which I'd like to mention is the role played by very young children in deforming language. Anyone who's had a toddler at home will know that a child starting to learn languages will be apt to do certain things. Sometimes the word copied will be copied perfectly by the child, of course. But more often, the word is reproduced incompletely. And for example, we'll see that the word monkey could be said ki. For example, a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old could say that. Or if you put the accent or emphasis on monkey, he might say mung. So this might become a new word if they're in isolated populations. Now, expanding on the facts presented by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, on whom be peace, the late Professor Muhammad Ahmad Mazhar put forward, I'm going ahead of myself, 10 formulae by which Arabic roots can be redeemed from a wealth of words in any language. Now, that might sound like a tall claim, but we're going to see some examples of that in a short while. Now, before we embark on that more entertaining part of the presentation where we'll demonstrate how these formulae actually work, it's necessary that a few words be said on the structure of Arabic itself, as well as its present state in the world. Arabic, like other languages, has in more recent history spawned a variety of local dialects in the Arab world, as everyone who knows Arabic will know. In addition to this, a newer version of the ancient language called Modern Standard Arabic has been born, and that's usually the Arabic which you'll be studying at university level, most likely. And into this, a number of loan words have been artificially introduced in common with other languages, reflecting the common words used in modern life, such as petrol, computer, video, with a slight sound shift, of course, but they're essentially the same words. Alongside this, it may seem curious that the old language, classical Arabic, called al-Fusha by Arabs, should have survived as a living language, still widely used in speech, literature, and religion. But the reason is the very root words of Arabic themselves. These are most often triliteral, meaning they contain 3 letters, 3 consonants, and none of these letters can be dropped, swapped around, or changed. Otherwise, the meaning of the root itself changes. So if you have three letters, let's say A-L-M, if you try to change any of the positions of any of the letters in there, it will automatically become another root, which will no longer have the same meaning. So this is why the roots in Arabic have tended to fossilize, and they haven't changed, mostly, to a large degree. So the stubborn resistance to change of these lexemes or root words has proven to be such an astoundingly efficient safeguard of the language that today none of the known ancient Semitic tongues can ever be fully studied or comprehended without reference to classical Arabic and its extensive lexicons based on its root words. So students of the Semitic languages will often refer back to Arabic to look for cognates, because many of the words in other languages are obscure, including in Hebrew. And so they'll have to go and look into Arabic to find the actual meaning of the word. As a preliminary to the formulae that can be used to redeem Arabic roots from any language, it's important to remind ourselves of certain well-established linguistic principles which must always be borne in mind while carrying out such an exercise. Now, gutturals such as I'm going to read it from left to right, Kha, Rain, Qaf, and Kaf, so Kha, Ra, Qa, and Ka, and semi-gutturals such as Ha, Ha, and A. I'm sure many of you will not agree that A is a semi-guttural, because I remember one author of a book, Teach Yourself Arabic, said that the only time an Englishman will pronounce the letter Ain will when he'll be vomiting. So it could be argued that it isn't a semi-guttural, but a full-blown guttural indeed. Anyway, they can be interchanged. For example, the word haq in Arabic, when it was introduced into other languages, for example, into Turkish, into Urdu, the pronunciation of it became haq instead of haq. So these letters can be changed among themselves. They can be softened, such as the harsh G pronounced as kh in Dutch verbs. For example, gezegd and gedaan, said and done, become gezegd and gedaan. So it's not written like that. It is written the same in both languages, but just to show the difference in pronunciation, in Flemish. So they can often be softened. And we know that that's what happened in English eventually, where they were finally dropped. So the kh became h, and then it was just dropped. And they can often be changed into other letters such as S and vice versa. H often becomes S, S can become H. As for example, Sindhu from the Sindh Valley in India becomes Hindu in Persia. So many Hindus themselves do not know that what they're calling themselves is actually the way the Persians call them. They would have called themselves Sindhus, but they couldn't say S, so they said H. Linguals as well, such as the Ra, Za, Sin, Shin, Sad, and Dad, are often interchangeable. Even in English, we see house in the singular becomes houses. So S becomes Z. This is also a feature we'll have to remember, because when we're retracing words back to Arabic, we have to expect these changes to have taken place so that we're not thrown off track. Similarly, dentals are interchangeable, such as t, th, or da, tha, dal, dhal, ta, dha, lam, and noon. Like, for example, I've given an example here, donder in Dutch becomes thunder in English. So d becomes th. We also find, and this is well known, that labials B, P, V, W, M, F, they're all interchangeable. And a classic example is abati in Arabic, which is with a B, becomes pita in Sanskrit with a P. Pater in Latin, again a P. Father in English with an F this time. Also, how can M become a B? Well, when you have a blocked nose, for example, then your M's become B's. And this could become a new language as well, if you think about it. Other examples are the K that become CH, like the language Kikuyu. In the Luganda language, Kikuyu is pronounced Chikuyu. They call their own language Chiluganda, but the word is actually a K. Then we have Küken in German, which becomes chicken in English. So K becomes Ch, K, Ch again. We find that the S can completely disappear, such as in several South American pronunciations of Spanish, where they'll not say mas, they'll say ma, but a bit longer, so that people know there's an S which was originally there. Then we find that S and TH, S and Th, can merge to become only one phoneme representing both. Again, in the Americas, we find that the Th phoneme, TH, has become S in quite a generalized fashion. We have vowel shifts between even languages in one single family, and a very well-known one, well-studied one, is the Germanic family language, for example, where we find vowel shifts going from German into Dutch, into English, into Frisian, etc. So the consonants are pretty much the same, but the vowels are very different. So this is to be expected. There are, of course, many other examples of sound shifts which have been well documented and seem to follow certain rules. But time, of course, does not permit for me to go into all of them today. And for an in-depth study thereof, Professor Muhammad Ahmad Mazhar's book, Arabic, the Source of All Languages, and this is Professor Sheikh Muhammad Ahmad Mazhar, will make for informative reading. When attempting to retrace words back to Arabic, allowance will necessarily have to be made, therefore, for all these known sound shifts. Now for the 10 formulae mentioned earlier. 4 of these are basic. We have number 1, the triliteral formula. Number 2, the biliteral formula. Number 3, the uniliteral formula. Number 4, the cipher formula. And the next 6 formulae are offshoots of the first 4. So the 5th one is triliteral metathesis. The 6th one is biliteral metathesis. The 7th is prosthesis. The 8th is prosthesis with metathesis. The 9th he's named toning up, and the 10th is called toning down. Now, each of these formulae will lead to a triliteral Arabic root. There will, of course, be some incidences of coincidental resemblances between an Arabic word and the non-Arabic word, and that's inevitable. Sometimes words can appear which seem absolutely identical to an Arabic word, which does not necessarily mean it came from Arabic, of course, but that will be inevitable. But on the whole, there are so many words that can be thousands and thousands of words which can be retraced back to Arabic that it still makes a good case for itself. The Arabic alphabet can be divided into 6 delicate letters, which the professor has decided these are the delicate ones, which is the Ain, the Hamza or Alif, the Ha, Ya, and Waw. These are the 6 delicates. And the others, all the others, he calls strong letters. Often you'll find that delicate letters will be changed into vowels in other languages. We're talking about the delicate letters in Arabic roots. They will often be found, but with a vowel in the place of those letters. Instead of those letters, or they will be dropped. They will have been dropped altogether. Here, an attempt is made to discover the consonants in exactly the same order as they appear in the original root word in Arabic, composed of 3 letters. By taking account of course, sound shifts, as we mentioned earlier, dropped letters, etc., this formula will give an abundant yield of Arabic source words from foreign words. Now for some examples. We have the word ghurab in Arabic. The root is gh, ra, ba. If you take into account the sound shift gh to k, then the root surfaces in corbeau in French, and I could be accused of being a little bit partial because French is one of my favorite languages. But anyway, it's ka-ra-ba from ra-ra-ba in corbeau. And then if you take into account the sound shift b to v, b to v, it appears in corvus, which means raven in Latin, and in crow itself. B to w, then we get ka-ra-wa in crow. Another example is qarn, which means in Arabic horn. So taking into account the sound shift qa to ka, it appears as ka-ra-na in cornum, which means horn in Latin. It also appears, if you take into account the sound shift qa to ga, in gorn in Russian, which again means horn. This is a very interesting example where a word has hardly changed, even after so long. Earth. The root arata, which can be changed to arada, which is ard in Arabic, which means earth. Then we have, of course, Erde in German, but that's a related language, so that might be expected. But we find the same root again, arada, which appears, which is in Arabic, ard. Now we have a very interesting and important word, because one must remember, I have given words which are common, which are of common life, which would be of immediate interest to the people living in those areas of the world. For example, scorpions, cats, forks, teeth, all these things would be very much important to them. Another one is milk. Now, milk, doesn't it sound like a very Germanic word? Old English, word. But actually, it comes from malaja, which means to suckle milk. One of the pronunciations of this, if you're in Egypt, would be malaga, which is even closer. So we find in English milk, we find the root, the k becomes j, or the other way around. We find mlijeko in Bosnian, again milk, malaka, bring it back to malaja, and again you get the root word. This brings us to, now there are thousands of examples that could be given here. Of course, I can't give them all. This is now the second formula, the biliteral formula. Now, a large number of Arabic roots are composed of two strong consonants and a delicate one, as I had said initially. And this formula will, by far, give the largest yield of Arabic root words redeemed from foreign words. By restoring a delicate letter to the root, after having made necessary corrections of sound shifts, the original triliteral Arabic root word can be restored. And here are some examples. Unuq. So we see that the root is a ain, and then a n and a q. Now, if you drop the first letter, which is a delicate letter, then you get, and of course the sound shift, which is a very small one, we get n, k in neck. We get again the same n, k in nuk, which is the nape of the neck in French. And if you go for the sound shift n to l, n to l, and then q to g, we get leeg in Filipino, which means neck again. Now, another very interesting root, it's to lie. Now, you might have seen other words in Arabic, those who study Arabic or who know Arabic, for the word to lie. But one of them is alaqa. Why? Alaqa actually means when lightning lights up. But it's that kind of lightning, as Arabic is a very specific language, as you've seen, it means that kind of lightning which promises rain, but which delivers none. So they say, if somebody behaves like that, he's lying. He's like lightning which brings no rain. And that's where that root comes. So you see, there is a philosophy behind the fact that this word was used to mean to lie. It refers back to that natural phenomenon. So there is a philosophy behind it. Now, if you go for the sound shift from q to g, and then, well, but that's it basically. It brings you to l, g, which is in lügen, for example, to lie in German, and also even in English, except that in English the g sound was dropped, and it's been turned into a y. So now to lie is no longer as similar as it was to the original word in the Germanic ancestral language. We find the same root again, l-g, in lagati, which means to lie in Croatian. We see liggande, which means lying in Swedish. And if you go for a further sound shift from g to zh, we see lozhny, which means false in Russian. So as you see, it's not only in Russia. It does happen in other places too. Now, we see the next root, which is anf, which means the first of anything, and therefore, by implication, it's something new, because it's the first time it's ever come. We see the root, which is an a and then n, f, but we're going to drop the delicate letter in the beginning and just concentrate on the next two, the n and the f. With a slight sound shift from n, f to nv, you get novum. Practically, you get all the words in the Indo-European family then, because more or less they have the same word for the word new. You have nov or no in Farsi. Again, we're going for the sound shift. We have neos in Greek, which means the same thing again. Novi in Slovak, which means again new. And of course, new in English. Which brings us to the uniliteral formula. Now, as you can see, it's getting a little bit more difficult here, because some Arabic words actually can contain only one strong letter and then two delicate letters. And these two delicate letters often have the tendency to be changed into vowels, or even to be dropped altogether. And so these vowels have to be reconstructed back into the original softer letter, or delicate letter, to be able to retrace the Arabic source word. Now, this formula will allow for a relatively smaller yield, of course, therefore, of Arabic roots redeemed from foreign words. We have, for example, he, which is just a h, that's all it can really be, but we find the same strong letter, h, in he, in Arabic, in huwa. And then we find sia in Filipino, which means he again. This time there's been a sound shift from h to s, which we see, for example, in Hindu, we've already spoken of that example. It's a common feature. And then you have she in Gaelic, which means again he. Again, the shift has gone from h to sh. Then we have a very, very important word indeed. The derivation of the negation in a lot of languages, not only the Indo-European ones, but many others too, with the letter N, showing the letter N for negation, could come from in, which is one form of negation in Arabic, or naha, which means to deny. It could even come from the word la, if the L becomes the N, because that sound shift is quite possible. Whatever be the case, we find that this derivation is there in no, the N in no, na in Bengali, nashi in Japanese, niet, which everyone knows, in Russian. And this is a very difficult formula to use indeed. Sometimes the original Arabic word may have been composed of three delicate letters. Now we're in deep trouble, really. Because now we only have delicate letters to play around with. And these often change into vowels. So the source word will have to be reconstructed by following the sound of the word and the meaning, of course. As the number of such words in Arabic is relatively small, very few words from other languages will lend themselves to be reconstructed in this fashion. Here are a few examples. I, the first person singular. In Arabic, there's one way of saying I, which is iyai, which means, or iyaya, only I. We have this in the first chapter of the Holy Quran, but for the second person singular, iyaka, only you, only thee, for example, or only thou. But for I, it would be iyaya, or iyai. And then in Norwegian itself, it might look like a yeg, but it's actually yai as well. And it's actually almost the Arabic, iyai. So here we're only going by sound and by meaning. Then we have the word age. We have the word in Arabic, ahya, which means to give life to. And as we know, the word age, the G can often change into Y, or it couldn't have changed from Y into G. So this is a possible. We have a similar word, iga, which also means age in Estonian this time, which is quite similar to ahya. Then we have ish in Gaelic, where again the H sound has been changed into sh. So again we're brought back to ahya. But it could also possibly come from asha, which also means to live. Ash. Ish, ash. This is also possible. This brings us to triliteral metathesis. Now, what is metathesis? It's the rearranging of letters within a word, often for the sake of either euphony, because it sounds nice, or for ease of pronunciation. So here, it will mean that all three letters of the original Arabic root have been preserved in the foreign word, but they have been slightly rearranged. And we find, for example, these are examples just to illustrate what I mean by metathesis. We find the Latin parabola has been changed into Spanish into palabra, for example, where you see the L has taken over the place of the R and the R has taken over the place of the L. That's metathesis. Then we have miraculum in Latin, which has yielded milagro in Spanish, which means miracle. Again, we see that the R and the L have swapped places. Now, we come to terra, and this is a very, very important part of the presentation here. It's just to illustrate how linguists who do not refer to Arabic or to Semitic languages in general are often at a loss. They really don't know how to derive the original, how to go back to the original root of the Proto-Indo-European tongue. It's because they don't compare to the Semitic languages. Had they done so, they would have found roots which are already there and which already lend themselves far better to the words they're studying. And this is how we'll find in certain dictionaries of etymology that the root word of in PIE, Proto-Indo-European, would be ER. And this is what they see in common with all the languages in Asia and in Europe. But actually, they omit the T, which is almost omnipresent in all these languages for a reason. It's because from the Arabic, it would have had the T or the D. And so terra, the actual root here is terra. With metathesis, we see that the T swaps place, and then we get the Arabic with a slight sound shift back to ard. And of course, we'd already seen a few on earth before, so I'm not going to go into too much, but there's another word, for example, in Hindi, dharti, which also means earth. And again, we see the same root, A-R-T, with a letter added before just for euphony. Now we see the word water, again, a very, very important word, one of the basic words of language. Earth, very basic. Water, very basic. And I've always wondered all my life that why is water so different from the ma we know of in Arabic? But actually, one day I came across this word, warada, which means to come to water. The place where the water is called mawrad, and that's from the same root. And that is, again, metathesis at play. So if you interchange the D sound and the R sound, automatically you get all the Indo-European words coming back again. Well, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. Even in, for example, but with one letter dropped in vod, in Russian, for example, and other languages of that family. Now to biliteral metathesis. So biliteral metathesis means that there are only two original Arabic letters from the root, but these have been transposed. So it's getting trickier and trickier now, as you can see. Here we have, for example, the word back, baka. If you swap them over, and then you add the delicate letter, you get aqaba, which means to be behind, hence back. Then we get wizen, which is waza. If you swap it over to zawa, you get zawa, which means to wither in Arabic. Then you get vacate, vaka, which it changes to waka and back to kawa. Then you get khawa, which means to be empty. And you get the same root appearing in Russian, in pokidat, which is to vacate, again, in Russian. Here it's the kawa has become waka and then paka. So the W has been changed into a P eventually after metathesis. Now to prosthesis, which is the contrary of prothesis, which is to add letters on. Prosthesis will be to remove them. So we see facile, easy in French. If we drop the F, which has been added on, then we get SL again, which is sahl. Of course, the F might have been an H, and then there was metathesis, which occurred, so the F might have been between the S and the L, which would have brought it back to the Arabic anyway. But we're just going to make as if they added it on for this purpose, the purpose of this today. Then we have espacer, which means to space out in French. Here, the root really is P and S, psa, which with a slight sound shift becomes fsa, which is fasha, which is a space, an open space in Arabic. Then we have frémir, which means to shudder in French. If you drop the initial F, which has been added on, again you get RM, ra'ma, which is rama'a, which means to shiver with fear. So one immediately sees the link between the two. Then we get Prunk, which is splendor in German. If you drop the initial P, you're left with the Arabic root, Raunaq, which means splendor. This brings us to the eighth formula, which is prosthesis with metathesis. So my apologies to any Welsh people here if I pronounced this wrong, but I think it's hulisor maybe, which means smooth in Welsh. And again, if you drop the initial H, then you'll get the LS and then SL, which is smooth. But again, the initial H might well have been part of the original root word. After metathesis, it had changed places. That's another issue. Then we have Stube, which means a room in German. If you remove the first S sound, the sh, you're left with t, b. After metathesis, beta, beit, which means house. Then we have bocina, which means horn in Spanish. Again, back to thna, which can be related to sana, again sin, prong in Arabic. Then we have lana, which is wool in Latin. If you remove the initial L, then you'll be left with a'na, which is ahn in Arabic, which is wool. Although, had the word been said al-ihn, the wool, maybe that in itself, the al-ihn became one word. Then we'd explain why there's an L there. Maybe the L comes from the al. That's also possible. The before last one is toning up. And toning up means basically to make a soft sound become harsher again. Like, for example, we've seen how we need to tone up the English word night to turn it back into the German or Dutch word Nacht, which would have been closer to the original word. And we see that by toning down, German gedacht and Dutch gedacht become thought in English. So to get back to the original, we have to again tone up the English word. So that's just a little example. So we find lupus, which is wolf in Latin. If you tone it up, adding the K, which was lost, then you get kalb, which is dog. And wolf itself actually is the same. We have the W, which can be changed back to the K, WK, KW, and that will again be dog. And finally, toning down. So we see Genick in German, which means the neck. We'll have to remove the G because it's too harsh. We'll tone it down, and it becomes unuq in Arabic, which is neck. Then we have reeve in English. We have to tone down the V to an F, and add the missing letter, which is a delicate one which had been dropped, and we get arif, which means a chief or a prefect. Then we get kietos, which means whale in Greek. Again, we have to tone down the K, so we're going to tone it down to an H, and we get hut in Arabic, which is a whale. And we get geben in German, which means to give, and we tone it down to wahaba, which means to give. And this would also hold true of English, but to a lesser degree, because English is already toned down. Now, there are some interesting examples. I'm only going to give a few here about the Bushmen, from the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert in Namibia. They are one of the most ancient human populations, genetically speaking, on Earth today. And they call themselves by different names. And it so happens that almost all of these names can immediately be recognized in Arabic, with a slight change. As I had said before, you know, words are sometimes halved by children. Sometimes they swap over letters. Sometimes they change letters. But basically, we can still see these words, and it's quite interesting. We see that they call themselves the San people, which in Arabic is insan. So they've dropped the first part, which means man. They call themselves Kwe, which is ikhwa in Arabic, brethren. They call themselves Basarwa, which is bashar in Arabic, which is man. They call themselves Sho, which is Shu'ub in Arabic. They've lost the last part. Shu'ub, which means people. And they call themselves Kung, which is Qawm in Arabic, people or nation. So all these words have something to do with people, nation, mankind, etc. It's quite interesting. Now I have to say something about the case of Hebrew, which is the oldest, Hebrew or Arabic. Why? Because often linguists who do agree that one can trace all languages back to the Semitic languages often opt for Hebrew, on a very flimsy basis actually, which is that Hebrew was written before Arabic, therefore it's older. But there are many languages which are still not written today, and they are quite old. So being written or not does not mean that the language is necessarily older. It just means that they took up writing earlier. That's all it means. And of course, we have to remember one thing about Hebrew. It's because of the great number of cognates between Hebrew and Arabic. Often, when one retraces a word back to Arabic, one could also retrace it back to Hebrew. But it does not work in a great number of cases in Hebrew, whereas it does in Arabic. That's a crucial point which I had to make. And Thomas Keyes makes some interesting remarks on the relationship between Hebrew and Arabic as far as their age is concerned. And he says that some linguists presume that Hebrew predates Arabic, and as I said, the main reason for this is that Hebrew predates Arabic as a written language by hundreds of years. But however, even a cursory comparison of Hebrew and Arabic vocabulary and grammar will show that Arabic is the older of the two. If a comparison is made between English and German, just to illustrate, one will notice that as a more conservative language, German has a more elaborate verb conjugation, for example, and a more elaborate declension of nouns than English does. We can assume, therefore, that English used to have a more elaborate verb conjugation and declensions in the past too. And indeed it did. If you consult an Anglo-Saxon dictionary, you'll see that English did. And now it's lost them. All these complications were dropped as time went by. Hebrew has no declensions whatsoever and a rather elaborate verb conjugation. Arabic has a six-fold declension and an even more complex conjugation. It is therefore reasonable to conclude that Hebrew must have also had these declensions and a more formidable conjugation in the past. This places Arabic closer to its ancestor than it has that it has in common with Hebrew, the common ancestor of the two. Arabic definitely seems closer to that than Hebrew does in that respect, at least. Now, another point to remember is to consider is grammatical number. Students of Arabic will know that Arabic has singular, dual, and plural. And plural denotes three or more of anything. An example is safina, one ship. If you want to make the dual out of that, you'll get safinatayn, two ships. And then you'll get sufun for anything more than that, three or more. So you have the singular, the dual, and the plural. This is completely general in Arabic. You can take any noun in Arabic and you can pass it through those formulae. You'll get the singular, you'll get the dual, and you'll get the plural. Now, and a very important point to mention, all the above-mentioned features of Hebrew were already present with the earliest writings of Hebrew. It's not like it happened recently. In the very early writings of Hebrew, we find all these letters falling together, the absence of broken plurals, and all this was already there. And it's well known that serious studies of biblical Hebrew have to refer back to Arabic to find the meanings of obscure words in the oldest written Hebrew. One will find that retracing words back to Hebrew will ultimately lead one back to Arabic. I'd like to conclude with the words of Professor Muhammad Ahmad Madhar himself, who said, and I quote, "It is to be noted that we began from the triliteral formula, which was simple enough. The biliteral, uniliteral, and cipher formulas drifted away from simplicity to complexity by slow degrees. Then came metathesis and prosthesis, distortions and perversions that had to be set right. And lastly, the two processes named toning up and toning down are very subtle, as the letters have now begun to fall off like autumnal leaves, and the words have begun to lose their identity. And here ends the track, and we have to stop. Thus, from the triliteral formula right down to the toning down formula, the scale has been sliding gradually from simple to subtle. Beyond the above noted definite formulas, one has to be faced with corruption, chaos, and confusion that have found their way into the words, and we have to leave them alone as lost beyond recognition. But all the same, the central parts of every language are comfortable to the above noted formulas. The 10 formulas discussed above prove that it was so ordained by God that different languages could be reconciled to Arabic by means of definite phonetic laws, end of quote. So just as human populations of all colors derived from an ancestral group of one color, they can all be genetically traced back to the Arabian Peninsula, their languages in all their present diversity can be traced back to the language of that ancestral group, Arabic, the mother of all languages. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to ask, what's the oldest written Arabic text you can find? So like
It's from the 500s AD, actually. It doesn't go much further than that. And so it's not very, very ancient. It only predates the Quran itself by just about 2 centuries.
Can I ask why that is? Because obviously other languages, they have text from much before that. So why was not Arabic written down or transcribed somewhere earlier?
Well, possibly because the Arabs were traditionally a nomadic people. And nomadic peoples don't usually tend to write things down. But that's I'm just surmising. When the necessity arose, then perhaps it started. But also because they had a very strong oral tradition among the Arabs. And we know, for example, that at the time of the revelation of the Quran, Arabs are well known for memorizing thousands of verses of poetry, memorizing them. And they could recite them off. And they could also, memorize their whole family history right back to Adam as well. And so this was a common thing.
I appreciate when you're using a PowerPoint that you can only have limited examples. But one problem I was finding that the vast majority of your examples are from the Indo-European family, and therefore giving one example in Punjabi could be said to be, and then giving an example in Russian and Gaelic, it's essentially from the same language.
Yes.
And you haven't mentioned any Chinese words, for example, and I was wondering if you had any examples that are not Indo-European and...
Well, off the top of my head, I don't have a lot of Chinese examples, but we do have the studies carried out by Professor Muhammad Ahmad Madhar, and those are online, where he's retraced Mandarin back to Arabic, Japanese back to Arabic, Yoruba back to Arabic, Sanskrit back to Arabic. There are Indo-European languages as non-Indo-European languages. I did give some, maybe you weren't here at the time, but I did give some examples, for example, of Vietnamese, of Indonesian. Those are not Indo-European languages. Commonly, they're not held to be so. But I didn't go as far as Chinese, because there is a reason for today. I wanted it to be a bit simple. To be able to redeem root words from Chinese is actually very difficult because of the nature of the language and how many sounds they've dropped, you see. And this is how they've ended up with long words being whittled down to just one phoneme sometimes, which means what it would have meant as a long word before. So it is quite difficult, but it has been done. And if you're interested in getting the links to those studies, then I think you'll be able to get these from the organisers today, hopefully.
Thank you. Could we have a new question, please?
Thank you. From many of the examples that you gave that started off from Arabic, and you showed how it's changed into other words in other languages, it clearly seems that the Arabic words have so much more of a pronunciation to it. It really uses you could say the muscles in the throat, to really pronounce those words properly. And even when you're speaking in Arabic, it's a lot more stronger, using so much more different, tones. And I was thinking that, do you think that languages have possibly evolved from Arabic so that it makes it easier on the tongue, because when we speak it's nowhere near is how it sounds when you speak Arabic?
Well, it might definitely be the case, because we do tend to see that in certain climates or certain areas of the world, people tend to pronounce words in a certain way. And it's not necessarily only because they speak related languages, because they don't always speak related languages, but they tend to pronounce in a certain way. And we see, for example, that anybody who just overhears Korean might take it for Japanese, and vice versa, if you don't pay attention. Whereas those languages, although some linguists are now arguing that they might well be related, but the relatedness of the two is far from being established. But being in the same area, they tend to pronounce in the same way. There might be many reasons for that, but it may be that in certain circumstances and eating certain foods and in certain climates, that people tend to pronounce words in certain ways which are easier for them in those ways. For example, if you're in an area where it's snowing like this, horizontally at you, I'm sure there are whole loads of sounds you will not want to say. You will be speaking in a very different way to whoever's right next to you, and that may completely change the way you speak eventually. It might be the case. So this is probably right, what you just said. Yes,
Thank you.
probably correct.
Jahangeer Sahib, just briefly, how do you think the event went today, and what kind of reception did you get from the audience?
Assalamu alaikum. I think I got a pretty positive response, and there was genuine interest there. I think people were intrigued by the fact that genetic research has shown that peoples all over the world have originated in the Arabian Peninsula at one point in their history, and that therefore the theory that Arabic may well be the mother of all languages is not just a theory. It has very solid ground to stand on. I think the response was more or less positive.
And just finally, for the people watching at home, what would your advice be to them if they want to take this further, if they want to get more understanding? How can they take the next steps?
Well, they could of course start by reading the book Minan ar-Rahman of the Promised Messiah alayhi salam, and read the works of Professor Sheikh Muhammad Ahmad Mazhar Sahib. I would also like to take the opportunity to launch an appeal to our youth to become linguists, because we really need more people in this field of expertise to be able to carry out research on some of the more exotic languages like the Aboriginal languages all around the world. I think that would be very beneficial indeed.
Thank you very much.